All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Becky Gligo. I'm the Executive Director of Housing Solutions. And today we're going to be going through sort of what is the current state of homelessness in Tulsa County. We're going to go through some PIT data. We're also going to talk through some specific subpopulations and trends that we're seeing. All right, so our agenda today, like I said, we're going to go through our point in time count overview, and I'll talk about what that is in just a second. And then we're going to talk about domestic violence in Tulsa County, affordable housing, and ultimately the affordable housing shortage in Tulsa County, justice involvement, and then we're going to feature what's happening with some housing success stories because we do have some programs that are really working for our continuum. So our speakers today, like I said, I'm Becky Gligo. I'm the Executive Director of Housing Solutions. I'm joined today by Jenny Hensley, who is the Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs for the Tulsa Housing Authority, Jacob Beaumont, who is the Director of Justice Initiatives for Housing Solutions, Lori Gonzalez, who's the Vice President of Advocacy Services for DIVIS, and Mac Haltom, who is the Executive Director of the Tulsa Day Center. So why does this matter? Why should we care about these numbers? Because ultimately these numbers represent people. When we do our point in time count, which is like a census for people experiencing homelessness in our community every year, what we're really doing is getting the stories and the background of our neighbors, figuring out how did they get to this place where they're experiencing homelessness? How have our systems failed this person? What resources do they need? And so it's a great way to really get out there, look at what's actually happening in our community, and maybe bust some myths and assumptions by really getting the story of what homelessness looks like in our community. We then take this data to inform policy changes, to look at our strategic plan implementation for A Way Home for Tulsa. We also report this data nationally to HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and that helps them decide what's happening across the country, what to fund, and where to potentially make changes to some national programs as well. And I know many of you on this webinar actually participated in our point in time count this year as volunteers, and we really appreciate the time that you took to get to better know our neighbors experiencing homelessness. So this year we did have an increase in our point in time count. We were able to survey 1,133 people, which is an 8.6% increase from the previous year. So we're steadily seeing a slight increase here. I will say that the point in time count is always an undercount. So we actually look at the people who are entering and exiting our system every month. If you haven't already, I would encourage you to go to Housing Solutions Tulsa .org and look at our data dashboards. But this count, while it is a little bit under the total number of people that we may see experiencing homelessness, really gives us that chance to ask some different questions and to really, again, deep dive on stories and conditions and see what people in our community need. So we see that the majority of people that we were able to survey were actually sheltered. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're in permanent housing, but they are in one of our shelters, like the Salvation Army or the Tulsa Day Center. 39% though were unsheltered, and that's a pretty big percentage of people that we were able to survey who are sleeping outside. So we are seeing an increase in unsheltered homelessness in our community. Part of that is because of the pandemic. During the pandemic, shelters had to decrease their capacity, so more people shifted outdoors. And we're also looking at policy changes and expansions for different low barrier opportunities that might decrease people who are living in an unsheltered environment and bring them into shelters while they await permanent housing. We also asked some demographic questions. So 52% of the people that we surveyed identified as white, 24% identified as Black, 14% identified as Native or Indigenous, and 10% identified as Latinx. And while we see that our BIPOC populations on the surface look like they're a lower percentage of people experiencing homelessness than our white population. If you compare this to census data, we actually have an outsized number of people who identify as BIPOC who are experiencing homelessness in our community compared to their representation in the local population in the census. So we know that there's also some equity issues and some historical housing discrimination that is ultimately contributing to housing insecurity and homelessness in our community. 20% of the people that we talked to this year identified as tribal citizens. And if you go to our dashboards on our website, you can actually see a breakdown of which tribes were represented. But we are seeing opportunities for collaboration with our local tribal nations and are looking forward to helping figure out how to better serve these folks. So one of the things that's really important to acknowledge when we're talking about homelessness is that homelessness does not exist in a vacuum. Oftentimes, people are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity because of the impact that other systems have had on their life. So we ask questions about how may you have interacted with other systems. So foster care, for example, 22% of the people we talked to, over a fifth of the people we talked to, had been in foster care at some point in their life. And we do see that as a pipeline to homelessness. 61% self-reported having a disabling condition. So these are folks that might need extra care for their mobility. They might have a medical condition or a disabling condition that is going to make it extra hard for them to be sleeping outside. 14% were employed. A lot of folks think that, man, if this person could just get access to employment, maybe this would look different. But we have people who are sleeping on the streets of Tulsa County every night who are finding a way to get up and go to work every day. And it's still not enough for them to survive on or for them to be able to afford housing. 56% had had some sort of interaction with the justice system and had a personal history of incarceration. And Jacob is really going to do a deep dive on that. But this is obviously a clear correlation with justice involvement leading to housing insecurity, not necessarily the other way around. 54%, and this is what Lori's going to talk to us about in a bit, experienced a history of domestic violence. One of the things that we've seen in these surveys these past couple years is that things that were on the rise for everybody due to the pandemic, relationship breakdown, issues with families, encounters with domestic violence, they're on the rise for everybody, and that includes people experiencing homelessness. And then 10% of our respondents were veterans. We are seeing a decrease in veterans homelessness, which is really exciting for our community. One thing that we have seen that is very alarming to us is that family homelessness has increased drastically. We are seeing more families with children experiencing homelessness than ever before. And in just the past 3 years, we've had an over 34% increase in family homelessness in our community. And we can attribute that to several things. Evictions have an outsized impact on families with children, and just people struggling with unemployment and cost of living. But this is a very concerning statistic. And we have great organizations like Family Promise and Tulsa County Social Services that are uniquely tackling family homelessness, but we are seeing this number continue to rise. One of the myths that we hear over and over again is that these folks must not be from our community. Maybe they're being bused here, sent here from somewhere else. And so it's important for us to get a realistic and accurate picture of who's experiencing homelessness in our community so that we can center our services in a way that they need. And so we ask every year, where did you first experience homelessness? And every year, the vast majority of people tell us that they are from Oklahoma, they're from Tulsa, and they first experienced homelessness in our community. Only 16% of the people we talked to became homeless outside of our state. So I think that's really important to ground in that these are our neighbors. This could be somebody you went to high school with, a neighbor down the street. This is a homegrown issue for us. And so we really need to think about how we can better serve the people around us rather than othering or perpetuating myths that these folks aren't from here. We also asked people, what led to your experience of homelessness? What happened? And 44% of the people that we talked to this year said it was a lack of affordable housing. So homelessness at its core is a housing problem and a housing scarcity problem. And we simply don't have enough affordable housing in our community, which Ginny's going to get into quite a bit. But the number one reason that people told us that they were experiencing homelessness, it wasn't mental illness, it wasn't addiction, it was simply that they didn't have access to quality affordable housing or just affordable housing in general. 37% lost their income or benefits. 31% experienced a relationship breakdown. 30% attributed it to mental health struggles. 27% experienced job loss. And 21% said that they were struggling with substance abuse disorder. Again, what we see here is a lot of overlap from increases in experiences that people are having across the board in the pandemic. These experiences are not unique to people experiencing homelessness. And yet these folks, because of their lack of access to affordable housing, are falling into housing insecurity or homelessness because of things that all of us might potentially be facing. We also ask them, what do you need? That's really important for us to hear directly from the people in our system what they need, what they're looking for. And so we're not making decisions without their input. And overwhelmingly, the number one thing that people said was housing placement. So again, lack of access to affordable housing and a need for help accessing housing or navigating the housing process was the number one thing people said. Transportation, case management, food services, dental care, those were all top needs that people shared with us. Now, we are seeing record-setting housing placements for our continuum, and you can see since 2020, when A Way Home for Tulsa really restructured its governance, we've seen a steady increase in the number of people who have been put into housing placements. Almost 3,000 people have been housed by our continuum just in the last 3 years, but it's not enough. We continue to see a need for increased access to affordable housing. And until we get that, we're going to have more people becoming homeless in our community every year than we can possibly house just due to lack of housing stock. But I do want to celebrate that this is exciting. Every single one of these numbers is a family or a person who was living on our streets or was living in a shelter or maybe was sleeping in their car that now has a safe, secure home that didn't 3 years ago. And so our Way Home for Tulsa, that's our continuum of care. Our Way Home for Tulsa partners are continuing to work together in a variety of ways. We're working to stop homelessness before it begins. The most successful thing we can do is keep somebody from becoming homeless in the first place. So we're tackling our eviction crisis. We are looking at discharge policies from hospitals and jails and really trying to end this pipeline into homelessness and housing insecurity from other systems. We are data focused. So again, I would really encourage you to go to the dashboards on our website and look at what the data is telling us, because we're using that to inform where to invest our limited resources and how to understand what people need. We're working with the city and other partners to advocate for additional affordable housing. We recently were able to publish a citywide housing study that shows what the gap is and what we have to do to close it. We're transforming the system to be more effective and equitable by bringing resources to people where they are. Again, all of that is informed by things like the point in time count, where we're asking people what they need instead of assuming that we know better. And then we are working to increase community support and funding. And so our hope is today, by you attending this webinar, that you're going to continue to learn about the work that's being done and ways that you can be involved in it. And just to show you, when we talk about A Way Home for Tulsa, that is a variety of agencies across the board, from social service entities like Divis or the Be Heard movement, to municipal governments, to corporate partners like Quick Trip. We're really working across sectors to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. And if you would like to join us in that endeavor, that's something that you can apply to do. Again, housingsolutionsTulsa.org. You could apply to be a part of this continuum and work with us on homelessness in our community. Other ways that you can help advocate. One of the biggest things that we come up against is NIMBYism, which means not in my backyard. I think universally we hear from folks in our community that affordable housing is a good thing, but people get nervous when it's going to go up in their neighborhood. So we need you to go from being a NIMBY, which maybe you're not, to a YIMBY. We want quality affordable housing in every nook and cranny of the city. And so please show up and advocate for those affordable housing opportunities and support the city of Tulsa and Tulsa County's efforts through different housing strategies to increase housing stock in our community. You can, of course, volunteer. You can go to our website or any of our partners' websites and learn about what their organization needs. And that could be anything from volunteering at Iron Gate, serving food, to working with the Be Heard movement, offering showers and barbershops and case management to folks. There's a ton of really unique volunteer opportunities out there. And then every year in January, we do need volunteers for this count, for the point in time count. And so that's something that towards the end of this calendar year, we'll start to ask you, do you want to come out and help us survey and ask these questions? If you're a landlord or a property owner, and Jenny is going to talk about these opportunities as well, please consider renting to the folks that we're serving. Please consider taking a Section 8 voucher and working with the Housing Authority on some of their programs. And if you're a developer, we need more affordable housing units. So let's look at how we can work together to increase the affordable housing count in our community. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Lori to talk about domestic violence, which, as we saw in the data, was one of the most frequent reasons that folks were, or one of the most frequent things that folks experiencing homelessness were encountering.
Hello, everyone. So I'm just going to go through some of the stats we see and how it might impact people who are experiencing homeless or on the verge of being homeless. So some of these things are what I call my reason to nag. So this first one, 54% of PIT respondents have a history of domestic violence. I mean, that's pretty big if we look at things. I can tell you that the reason why we see a lot of people coming in here as a crisis walk-in or because they are homeless or on the verge of being homeless because of the domestic violence they've experienced. So another reason why I nag, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men will have experienced sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner. And I can say that Oklahoma has one of the highest rates of lifetime prevalence of intimate partner violence. This always makes me sad. We are number 2 in the country for women killed by men in 2020. At one point, we had dropped out of the top 10, and I was really excited. However, we're back down to number 2, and I don't see us getting any better. And Tulsa has higher rates per capita of women murdered by men than Oklahoma City. So we have to do something different. I know every time I look at the news, it seems like there is another murder-suicide or somebody that's murdered or maimed or something by a partner. And as you can see, 78% of female victims were killed by somebody they know. Last year in Tulsa, there were 18,121 domestic violence related calls to 911. And that seems horrific to me. And honestly, that does not represent all of the domestic violence situations that I've experienced. These are just the ones that managed to make the call to 911. A total of 1,195 domestic violence arrests were made. You will notice there are 649 of those domestic violence exams that were done were related to strangulation. We are seeing a huge uptick in strangulation cases. And so if you encounter somebody who's experienced strangulation, please help them reach out and get help, because we know that strangulation is a red flag to further domestic violence and potential death. So just a little bit about what DIVIS does. We talked a lot about domestic violence. However, I want to say we also deal with sexual assault and human trafficking and stalking. You know, domestic violence situations impact people and can lead to homelessness. However, I want to say anywhere from 20 to 30% of the sexual assault exams we help with in a year are with homeless people. So it is very dangerous to be on the streets. Furthermore, we are seeing an uptick in our homeless population that are being trafficked. So they are being forced to engage in behaviors that they don't want to do for money. So sex, they may be forced to work. All of those trafficking behaviors we are seeing a lot of. But just a little bit so you know what we can do and make those referrals. We want to prevent homelessness. We want to prevent further domestic violence and violence. And so getting counseling and help is one of the biggest ways to do that. So we have children's counseling, we have adult counseling, and that adult counseling can be individual, it can be group. Uh, we do two different types of group counseling. One is what we call a skills group. And excuse me, my allergies are acting up. That skills group is about teaching people the skills they need to move forward in life. And then we have what's called a step group, which is understanding the dynamics of domestic violence and sexual assault. So again, individual group counseling, they can come in as a walk-in crisis. And we see people all the time come in because of safety issues or their emotional well-being. But one of those top 3 or 4 is always going to be, I'm fixing to be homeless. I'm fixing to be kicked out of my home. We want to prevent that. So encourage people to come in as a walk-in crisis. When they come in, we are always going to do safety planning with them to make sure that they are safe in the situation where they're at. And safety when a person's on the street is going to look different than if they're in their home. We also have emergency shelter, which is wonderful. I will say it feels like 9 times out of 10 we're full. But if we're full, we will do everything in our power to make sure somebody gets to a different shelter. We're going to try really hard. So again, that's for domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking. We're able to shelter all genders, those with varying physical capabilities, the LGBTQ survivors. We really don't discriminate. We want to get anybody that needs safety to our shelter where we can help. We have advocates who are going to help them start working on getting jobs, applying for housing, get protective orders, you name it. We're going to start working on those so that it just enhances things. It moves them forward in life. We also will help them get into school. Again, individual and group counseling. We got children's services. We got childcare. And we were the first in the state to have a dog and cat kennel. We found that people will not leave their situation if they have to leave their animal behind. And so to take away that barrier, we added that in. Finally, and this is just a little bit of what we do, we have it's called the Family Safety Center. And the Family Safety Center is like a one-stop shop. So people can come in, they can get protective orders. We have attorneys that can help with family law cases, protective order cases, those things. I'm not an attorney, so, but lots of stuff. And then we can make referrals for other things. We do case management services. Again, at all our sites, we're trying to break barriers that can lead to homelessness, more victimization, things like that. We also have forensic nurses. If you encounter somebody who's been assaulted, please refer to our Family Safety Center. Our nurses will look them over. They will document injuries. And not only that, they will make sure they get the medical care they need. So, chaplain, and we got child care on site, which is all those eliminating barriers to moving forward. And I think that sums up the DIVIS part of it.
Thank you so much, Lori. We're going to go ahead and move over to Jenny now to talk about affordable housing. In the meantime, if anybody has questions, please use the Q&A to put them in there. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll go back and be able to answer some of those questions. And I'll turn it over to Jenny.
Thank you, Becky, and thank you to you and your team for putting this together. I'm grateful for the opportunity to participate because, as Becky has shared, you can't address homelessness without addressing affordable housing. I'm going to take us back to sociology class for just a minute and reference Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you see here. That bottom foundational piece of physical needs includes things like food and shelter. If someone comes to you and tells you that they're hungry, what's the first thing you're going to do? Probably going to find them something to eat. And yet, when we talk about homelessness, we take that inverse approach and we want to look upstream at the contributing factors. And while those are certainly critical to addressing the overall need, it doesn't address that immediate need for shelter. And as Becky shared, homelessness is at its core a housing problem, and we have to treat it as such. And that was really crystallized in this year's point in time count data. The number one cause of homelessness that was reported by respondents was lack of affordable housing, with the number one need reported of housing placement. So what does Tulsa need in terms of affordable housing? The citywide housing assessment found that across all levels of housing, Tulsa needs to invest $2.45 billion over the next 10 years to address that need, with more than half of that need coming from that affordable piece. So anyone who's living at or below Tulsa's AMI, which is the area median income. That looks like around 64,000 households in Tulsa that qualify for either a subsidy or some other level of affordability, with only 14,600 units to meet that need. So a significant gap. And this slide breaks that gap down just a little bit further to make that picture a little clearer for us. So for low-income individuals and families, Tulsa needs to create over 6,000 new housing units. And that's going to range in income from folks who have zero income to those all the way up to $54,000 per year. And you can see that breakdown among income levels here. So alongside affordable housing, Tulsa has to address its need for workforce housing. Workforce housing is sometimes called that missing middle, and it applies to households that make anywhere between 60 and 120% of Tulsa's area median income. They typically don't qualify for a traditional subsidy like we offer at Tulsa Housing Authority, but they still need that affordability. So we're looking at incomes between $33,000 a year and $81,000 a year. All of the occupations you see listed here meet that income requirement, or at least that income threshold. So we have teachers, policemen and women, firefighters, service industry professionals, people that work jobs that keep this city afloat, and yet they fall in this 30% of households in Tulsa that can't afford average rent. Additionally, more than half or almost half of Tulsans are cost burdened with their housing. That means they're paying more than 30% of their income towards their housing. And you think about it, when you're living with that little margin, one crisis is all that it takes to lead to catastrophe. And oftentimes, those are the types of incidents that create homelessness in our community. So at Tulsa Housing Authority, this is kind of an idea of what we currently provide to folks in Tulsa who need affordable housing. We have 14 housing communities across Tulsa with over 2,000 units total. In addition to our housing properties, we also administer the Housing Choice Voucher or Section 8 program. We have around 5,200 vouchers within that program that are available for Tulsans. That also includes Veterans Affairs supportive housing, which combines that voucher subsidy with wraparound social services and supports provided by the VA. At any point in time, we typically have around 350 individuals or families with a voucher in hand out looking in Tulsa in the private market to find a place where that voucher subsidy is accepted. And so, as Becky mentioned earlier, one of the quickest and most effective ways to address the need that we're talking about today is for more landlords in Tulsa to accept those vouchers. So across all of our wait lists, inclusive of all of our properties and our voucher programs, we have over 31,000 Tulsans waiting for a place to call their home. So clearly there's a problem. And so let's talk about what we at Tulsa Housing Authority are doing to try to be part of that solution. We, over the last several years, have initiated the process of converting our public housing properties to project-based voucher properties. That's a lot of behind the scenes, inside baseball, but essentially what that allows us to do is access different funding to make needed repairs to our properties so that we're able to preserve the housing stock that we have. The last figure that I saw for HUD, they have a backlog for capital repairs of $26 billion. And if we were to remain in that public housing space, we would be totally at the mercy of HUD and their funding for that. So converting over to project-based voucher properties allows us to access funding and preserve our current housing stock. And so that's what we've been doing over the last few years. In addition to preservation, we're also creating new housing. We're very excited. Tulsa now is one of very few cities in the United States to have 2 active choice neighborhoods projects. Our first is at River West, out on the west side near Eugene Field. That represents the largest investment in affordable housing that the city of Tulsa has ever made. And we're going to do even more at Comanche Park, which is up in North Tulsa. And so we're super excited about that to get that going. But over the last few years, between 2019 and last year, almost 1,200 units have been impacted, either preserved or created. That was a quick overview of what we at Tulsa Housing Authority are doing to try to be part of the solution to homelessness in our community. But this is a community-wide problem, and it's going to require community-wide effort and commitment to mitigate it. And so we hope that the information that is shared today encourages you and the organizations you work for to come alongside us and everyone else here today to try to be a part of that solution and ultimately create a better Tulsa by transforming lives and communities. Thank you, Becky.
Thanks, Jenny. So I'm going to pass it over to Jacob to talk about the intersection of criminal justice and homelessness. Again, please, if you have any questions, we'll have time to address those at the end. Use the Q&A feature in Teams, and we'll go ahead and review those. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Becky. Good morning, everybody. Today, I want to give you a broad overview of who experiences homelessness in the Tulsa County Jail, as well as an overview of the broad intersection of justice involvement and homelessness. This year was unique in the sense that it was the first time our community was let into David L. Moss, the Tulsa County Jail, to execute the full pit count. So as of the weekend that we did the pit count, we saw 188 individuals booked into the Tulsa County Jail as experiencing homelessness at the time of their booking. 110 of those individuals met the HUD definition of homelessness, and we were able to interview 75 of them. To reinforce an earlier point, what we see is that similar to out in the community, 93% of those incarcerated at the Tulsa County Jail are Oklahomans. 85% of them are Tulsans. So in the following slides, when we're talking about these individuals who are justice involved and experiencing homelessness, we are talking about our fellow Tulsans and fellow Oklahomans by and large. In terms of the demographic makeups of this population in the Tulsa County Jail, it is overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male. But some things that stand out is that we do see an overrepresentation of Black Tulsans in the Tulsa County Jail that are experiencing homelessness. This aligns with the disproportionate amount of justice involvement among Black Tulsans compared to their white counterparts, as well as the disproportionate experience of homelessness for Black Tulsans among their white counterparts. Other things also worth noting within this incarcerated population was that 13% were what we refer to as transitional age youth. So these were individuals between the ages of 18 and 24. 5.5% of them were veterans, and almost 2/3 were what we refer to as chronically homeless. So they'd been homeless for 1 year or more prior to their incarceration. These individuals, to broaden the scope a little bit, are caught in what we refer to as the homelessness to jail pipeline, whereby these individuals find themselves out in the community having to engage in certain activities that lead them into contact with law enforcement. And we know that people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness are 10 times more likely to encounter law enforcement on a daily basis. This leads to further justice involvement, so jail, fines, fees, etc. And that people with justice involvement released back out in the community are 7 to 13 times more likely to then go on to experience homelessness. When we interviewed the individuals at David L. Moss and talked to them about what led to their homelessness prior to incarceration, we see that it was past criminal justice involvement far and away. It was reported at more than 80%. And then at almost 80%, it was a lack of affordable housing. The other top causes, still reported by 50% or more of those surveyed at the jail, included substance use disorders, a loss of income or benefits such as Social Security or disability, untreated mental illness, and job loss. So let's discuss the basic whys. What underpins this homelessness to jail pipeline? And it's this idea that people who are experiencing homelessness are far more likely to have to engage in activities related to survival that we have classified as low-level offenses. And so these might look like things such as trespassing, setting up an abode, public intoxication, etc. These are things that are associated with untreated mental illness, untreated substance use disorder, and obviously a lack of access to housing. Because they're forced to live outside and engage in these activities, as stated on the previous slide, they're far more likely to encounter law enforcement and further their path into the justice system through the courts, into jail, back out into the community, sometimes into community corrections. Because of this, they're picking up fines, fees, jail stays, and a criminal record that's going to follow them out into the community. And because of this, they get further removed from housing, healthcare, employment, and other critical opportunities. And this is an opportunity for us to push back on another myth, because when we talk about the criminalization of homelessness, we don't talk about them in terms of individuals who are inherently more criminogenic, they are more, predisposed to being violent or dangerous, because that's simply not the case. Realistically, people who are experiencing homelessness are far more likely to be the victims of violent crimes than people committing the violent crimes. And that outside of engaging in these survival activities that we discussed on the previous slide that we've made into crimes, they're no more likely to be a criminal than somebody who is housed. In wrapping up, because we only have a little bit of time and I could talk to you all day about this and still just scratch the surface, when we look at kind of the top causes of homelessness and the top needs among those inmates experiencing homelessness that they indicate to us they'll need this upon release, it is housing placement, it is healthcare, it is treatment, it is transportation, it is case management, and that these all align with their needs prior to incarceration. And they also align with the needs that we see more broadly across the community that's experiencing homelessness. What this tells us is that homelessness is not a public safety issue. It's a public health issue, and that it's not about criminal justice. It's about housing and economic justice. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jacob. And I'm going to turn it over to Mac to talk about some bright spots in our community. Mac, you're muted.
I swear I wasn't going to do that. Anyhow, thank you to Becky, Lori, Jenny, and Jacob for those reports. I was just saying we have many challenges ahead of us, no doubt. And it is a privilege for me this year to be able to chair A Way Home for Tulsa with so many amazing agencies that's all involved in creating an environment, hopefully where homelessness is rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. We're working really hard together. And I have to say, as chairman, that we are organized. We are going at it full bore, and we're continuing to do that. So I also get to be executive director of the Tulsa Day Center, and you see our mission and our vision statement there. We shortened our mission statement a few years back. It was very long and kind of a paragraph, and we kind of narrowed it down to that we serve those who are experiencing or at risk for homelessness. And as we were with board members and some other staff, we were trying to figure out a good vision statement. And we feel like it's a very ambitious vision statement, but we believe that we can do this, and we're putting hopefully our money putting where we should be doing that. So we envision a future where every Tulsan has a home. Most of you probably already know what we do at the Tulsa Day Center. We just recently renovated. By the way, we are back to pre-pandemic numbers. We're seeing that. So we're averaging in our day shelter. We provide the emergency shelter, both day and night shelter. But we're seeing around 250 to 300 coming in daily, 7 days a week. And we're housing at night anywhere from 75 to 85, I think, at night right now in our night shelter as well. And we have our rapid rehousing program, which I'll talk a little bit about a little later on in this presentation. But it's a HUD-funded program along with with private dollars, providing short-term rental assistance and services. The goals are to help people that are homeless to obtain housing quickly, increase the self-sufficiency, and of course, we want them to stay in housing as well. We also have permanent supportive housing, which is connected to Hudson Villas. You see on the bottom there. We actually have scattered. We have 17 scattered site permanent supportive housing at 2 different apartments that we master lease, Union Point and New Haven. We also have 18 units at Hudson Villas, where we have actually a total of 60 apartments at Hudson Villas. Hudson Villas is 10 years old this year in June. And we have 18 permanent supportive housing units. We have 10 project-based vouchers with the Tulsa Housing Authority. And we also use the mixed model. We have the market rate units as well as vouchers. 5 of those units are 1 bedroom. The rest are efficiency apartments. And we are at 95% capacity currently at Hudson Villas. Also with a challenge of doing a repair that we had a pipe break back in December we're working on too. We also have at the Tulsa Day Center a medical clinic. You see that we've had over 7,000 visits in 2022. Meeting the needs of hopefully the PIT count. We're seeing the medical needs there. I know dental is still up there as well. Case management is you see that the PIT count is a great need. We currently, our case management team served over 18,000 individuals in 2022 as well. You see the rapid rehousing number of 400 housed. We'll get to that in just a few minutes as well. But I also wanted to talk about homeless prevention. Homeless prevention is different than eviction prevention. That number is just about right that we did in 2022. There may be a little bit of discrepancy. However, homeless prevention are folks that individuals and families that we have previously assisted. They are in HMIS, our homeless management information systems. We have touched them at one point in time, at least in the last 2 to 3 years, where we've helped them get rehoused. And once they're closed out of rapid rehousing, they're still welcome to come back if they have hiccup during their housing experience, hopefully to keep them in housing as well. We also, you see the volunteer hours that we've done as well. I want to introduce you to Marla. And this is a good video. Just watch it, please.
A few months ago, I was living under the fridge in the tent. I had dogs, and they came and took my tent. So that's why I stayed in the basement. Oh, yeah. All the same? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I'm so grateful to everybody. All this stuff. I'm almost overwhelmed. We've been wanting this for a long time. This is what it's all about, if you ask me. Okay, baby, you're finally home. We're home. Yeah.
So that was Marla, Sophie, and Sweet Pea. We're so grateful. She was one of the 400 individuals that we rehoused last year through our rapid rehousing program. Just to kind of look at this last slide before I turn it back over to Becky, that those 400 individuals, around 400 individuals, were 66 households. Individuals in households was 206, and then we broke it down to single individuals of 190. So we rented over 256 units last year to house that to those individuals. The thing that the data, that last data point there, under children under 18, that was 121 children we helped rehouse with their families under the age of 18, which really goes along with that increase we see in family homelessness, which is a real big concern of mine. And I know for all of us as well, seeing children homeless, and we're getting more calls, and I know the other family shelters are too, and hopefully we'll have a solution to help out on getting them off the streets and out of their cars soon. There's a myth out there. There used to be a myth that it was too costly to rehouse those experiencing homelessness. You see the cost that we did on our homeless on our cost last year on our dollars, spending over $250,000. Average spent on each unit was under $1,000, and you see the individual cost as well. By the way, there is another myth out there. I think I've been dealing with, and I know some of you have been that there's a belief that most homeless folks experiencing homelessness need some kind of treatment or rehab before housing. But you can see there that we have a 93% retention rate. 93% meaning 93% of the people that we housed are still in housing after 1 year. And just like Marla, all Marla needed was a home for Sophie and Sweet Pea. Thank you for this opportunity.
All right. Thank you so much to all of our presenters. Right now, we don't have any questions in the Q&A, but I'll wait that out a minute if anybody wants to drop a question in for any of the folks that spoke today. But just to kind of wrap us up, all of us that were on the call today are working together to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. And that collaboration is essential. And we hope that you'll continue to learn more about the work that we're all doing and work to be a part of it.